Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friends Show. I am your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I am joined by Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you, sir?
As good as one can be expected in the topsy-turvy world that gave us COVID and now World War III.
Yeah. No, I very much agree. Feel the same way. And of course, we also have Mr. Hermann Pretorius. Hermann, how are you, sir?
I'm well. I'm very much impressed that I'm part of a Daily Friend episode that goes out on time. I think it's the first time I've actually seen the 13:30 in the bottom of my screen and gone, well done us.
Well, mine says 13:27. So.
Oh, well, you see, we're even early. We're in such a fantastic space right now. But anyway, well done for making it on time, Herman. Let us commence with our first story of the day. And that is a short little story that was reported on Eyewitness News. It's quite shocking, not a lot of details at this stage, but apparently a medical intern at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital has described to Eyewitness News that basically she's starving. And she was no longer even able to borrow money from friends to pay rent, buy food, pay for transport to work. Apparently, a group of at least 10 medical interns at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital have not been paid a single salary so far this year. They were currently, and a lot of them said, according to Eyewitness News, that they were battling to buy food and pay for transport. The Gauteng Health Department, when contacted to comment about this, said, the 10 affected interns were not yet on the government's payroll system, and we'll pay them next week. They went on to say that sometimes they don't allocate enough positions for interns to a particular hospital, and there's more interns than there actually are on the books, and this causes the problem. The interns who were interviewed said that it had taken a toll on them emotionally and physically. One of them claimed to have lost weight because they literally were not able to properly buy food. Pretty hectic stuff, considering that presumably these are the kind of people that we should be trying to attract to South Africa's healthcare system. These kids or these young adults, I mean, the first chance they get, I suspect they're probably going to try and find a job somewhere else. Terence, let me start with you. What do you make of this?
If you mean finding a job somewhere else, maybe you can start with a local McDonald's. No,
at least they pay you.
Yeah, and you can probably get some leftovers. No, it's an absolute travesty. And it goes. It's just another indication of how things, the wheels have come off. I'm sure that there could be there's some reason behind this. There's some if not a justification, there's some explanation. But this is basic stuff. This is about paying for services rendered. Something that we have this entire Encyclopedia Britannica of labor laws about. Although interesting, I understand that a certain ruling party of this country has also been somewhat lax in its in meeting its obligations to its staff.
It's very funny how the party that claims to represent the working class is not very good at paying the working class.
Yes, and in this case, as someone says, welcome NHI. Well, yeah, that's kind of where we're going. The sort of default solution of our government seems to be more government, more state. Which there's a simplistic view of this then translates into more development and more empowerment to solve the problems. The problem, of course, is the dysfunctionality of those very institutions themselves. One doesn't have to be a radical anarcho-capitalist free market running dog ideologue to sort of understand that the idea that South Africa is a developmental state is the great delusion. It's and look, what we see here isn't about promoting champions or forcing our way into the global microchip manufacturing economy. This is about keeping a payroll up to date for doctors. That's quite an important thing. But also, this is basic stuff.
And something that is, I mean, Terence, you say we're not a developmental state. I mean, you could just take the develop out of that, and you've pretty much got where we are. We're just a mental state in the sense that this is, and Janet said, actually, Janet, you took the line I was going to use, because this is what the NHI is going to essentially boil down to. We must realize that there's a big difference between the NHS in the UK and the NHI in South Africa. The NHI will not be a service provider. It will be a funding mechanism. It is a financing mechanism for public health. So it will just be this. It will just be moving money from one point to another. And the idea is that you will have more money to spend on more people. But the problem is, if you can't manage the very minimal salaries of 10 interns, then the chances of you using the 700 billion rand that the NHI will actually cost South Africa to any practical extent or useful extent, I mean, it's just utter fiction. And the problem here is also that how did it come to this is something that we should consider. It's not good enough to say, ANC, corrupt cadres. Now, there's something deeper going on here. It is that where people get, where the state is handed too much power by people, the state becomes, the temptation point for every kleptocratic maniac in this country. The money that should have gone to these interns probably went to, I don't know, some very, very nice Bosasa package somewhere, or a new car or something. The thing is that it's not just a question of money being ineptly spent. It is a question of money spending being concentrated politically in the hands of a few cadres and cronies, who then go on to spend it ineptly. This sort of thing is not the problem. Poor managerialism is not the problem. Poor debit order skills in the government is not the problem. The problem is that we've given these people so much power, so much money, that your most vulnerable people, literally people doing the best thing they possibly can by trying to make people healthy, cannot even get paid. It's really just, it's beyond disgusting. And it just shows that things like cadre deployment, preferential treatment, or preferential treatment for, this race, that race, if you've got a system that's not based on merit, the people who will suffer are the people who need the system to work most. That's usually the poor in South Africa. That's usually a Black South African who still suffers from the poverty caused by apartheid and kept in place by the ANC.
Actually, you can roll back about 10 or 15 years. There was a big scandal about, I think it was the Eastern Cape Health Department. It wasn't the only one. Certainly it wasn't the only province or the only department that was sending large sums of money back to the national fiscus because they couldn't spend it. And this was the time when we were rolling in money. And when I think the state was somewhat more functional than it is now. So, yeah, just lacked the ability even to pilfer what was there. It's not a, it's a very unhappy situation. And yeah, committed service ethic doesn't mean very much to a vengeful landlord who does actually expect the rent to be paid. You can tell, and you can, be as upset with the landlord as you want. It's not going to hold them. Yeah, at the end of the day, we all got to eat.
Right. What's fascinating to me about NHI is a lot of the sort of ANC's pie in the sky programs. That you have to look overseas for an example of sort of the total failure, or you have to look over the border at Zimbabwe or something like that. But NHI, we've actually seen a fair amount of very specifically what the South African Health Department can accomplish. There was a pilot project for NHI in Limpopo, which by all accounts failed. There were, of course, the vaccination system here in South Africa, which seems by most accounts to have not really made much of a difference to the to how much of the population is being vaccinated. I just got an SMS saying I must come for my booster. As the country's pandemic seems to be over. So anyway, yeah, it's just fascinating that it can be continued to be talked about with even the slightest shred of credibility, considering we've already seen so many failures to implement little pieces of NHI by the health department.
I just want to
Final thoughts.
get your attention on a message that came through on the work WhatsApp, just on the work WhatsApp, not the work WhatsApp, the work WhatsApp group just now, where
Good
it's
Lord,
from
it's worse than I thought.
It's from the Umzinyati district municipality. It's a brag about the fact that they have achieved a qualified audit outcome opinion. Now, a qualified audit means all is not above board. So if you've got public servants bragging, so uninformed, so bereft of merit that they think, oh, well done, we got a, they just see the word qualified and think, well, that's something I'm not, and it's something people are telling me I am, so I'll wear that as a badge of honor. It's really this standard of public service and public administration, that cadre deployment and a centralized government state based on patronage and tribal advantage. This is the product. I mean, on the one hand, you've got these morons, and on the other hand, you've got interns trying to make people healthy without being able to eat themselves. Well, not eat themselves, eat food for themselves. I just think it's a travesty. It truly would be funny were it not this embarrassing.
Indeed. Anyway, let's move to our next story. And this is a report from the anti-corruption journalist group, Amabungane, which looks into infighting in the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA, which has an investment company. Of course, many of South Africa's unions are quite involved in business, despite the fact that they are unions. And in this particular case, a lot of people in NUMSA seem to be quite upset with the leadership of NUMSA, that being Irvin Jim and his ally, Kandani Msibi, for allegedly pretty much using the union's investment company to suit their own political ends. This kind of came to a head, and we actually talked a little bit about this in our last week when we talked about political party funding. The political party funding report for this quarter showed that there was a particular company called 360 Health, which had given substantial amounts of money, at least 2 million rand, to the ANC, the EFF, the ATM, and Good. So you can kind of see where they sort of swing politically when those are the parties that they're giving money to. Well, that company is owned by the NUMSA investment company, which, while it's giving 2 million rand away to give to political parties, to the ANC and the EFF and those other small parties, they are at the same time having part of their business, that being the life insurance part of their business, placed under custodianship because the thing is so mismanaged and looks like it's going to go bankrupt. Quite interesting here, and I think what we're really seeing is a rare glimpse into the power that unions have in South Africa to kind of affect politics, and how they're sort of actually quite integrated into the ruling party's political system in many ways. Hermann, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I must say it's sort of every single chicken coming home to roost, in a sense that we must appreciate that the South African economy, for a few years there between the early 2000s and mid 2000s, did well, and money was sufficient to go around. And the problem is that it's the good old Thatcher quote: at some point you run out. The problem with socialism is that at some point you run out of other people's money to spend. And the problem with a state with absolutely uncontrolled expenditure, and so much money flowing to it, attracts the most corrupt and the kleptocratic. So the ANC and its allies have essentially turned into a criminal syndicate of money laundering through the fiscus and through whatever avenues are available in the political sphere of finance. And that actually affects all politically involved parties. That at one point this culture was established that you can actually have this patronage network because the country for a brief second there looked like it could afford it. And therefore the whole political culture of the ANC and the tripartite alliance, the union included, bought into that culture because it was just our turn at the trough. It was just our turn to eat, essentially. Now, the problem is that you couple that with a dysfunctional socialist state that wastes money and slowly suffocates its tax base. You can't have manageable levels of corruption and manageable levels of bribery, like some countries have. I think South Korea might be an example of that, where corruption is priced in to the functioning to the system, but the system functions, so you can afford this, this overhead of corruption costs. In South Africa, we don't have that buffer because we've got mad socialists in charge who just know how to waste money. So that rings out into the sphere of the unions, and it is all boiling down to seeing really the ANC for what it really is. Either ideologically convicted, or well, in more than one way, is ideologically convicted socialists who genuinely believe that the mother or the father state is the best way for South Africa to move forward. So they want to take your money, or it is it consists of people who think it's their turn to eat, and the carcass is becoming smaller and smaller, so you better pick away rather swiftly. So the ANC is essentially, in a weird way, divided between those who want to take your money and those who want to steal your money. And these are consequences of ideological decision making dating back to 2007, when the economy was booming just before the big crash and just before the socialists gained control over the big policies, especially the fiscus. So we go on about ideology, and people wonder what the point of the battle of ideas is. Well, this is it. The NUMSA just slowly collapsing into its own inadequacy and political cadre bankruptcy. It really spawns from this poisonous ideology that the government and the state should be all, and that should give the opportunity for kleptocrats to loot and patronize to their heart's content.
Terence, what do you make of the infighting over the NUMSA Investment Corporation and their political donations?
Someone's going to come
sorry, sir, you were muted.
You put money on the table and someone's going to come sniffing around with motives that are less than pure. I don't think that's particularly contentious. I'd like to take this from another point of view. NUMSA established its own political party, the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party, which didn't make much impression in 2019. But I see seems to have got like 2 seats in the municipal election. Just seems a bit, how can I say this, dodge that they are giving their money to the ANC, especially after NUMSA broke with the ANC because they weren't income communist enough, and various other related or non-related parties, as the case may be. So, I do remember the 1990s when these union investment vehicles were set up, and the idea was twofold. First of all, there was a lot of sort of pension money going through, and they believed they could do a better job than financial institutions. Secondly, this was kind of about taming capitalism. They wouldn't put it in exactly those terms, but the idea was that as long as South Africa is a market economy, they should participate in it and direct investments to socially responsible goals. I don't know. I think you could probably invoke Ngugi wa Thiong'o about how all capitalists ultimately end up behaving the same. And this certainly seems to be the way it's gone here. But I would really like to hear some input from the revolutionary socialist leaders of the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party to know why the investment vehicle is like putting 2 million into the ANC, but I'd put 2 million into them. Who knows?
Yeah.
And yes, it's quite correct. Solidarity groups like Solidarity have also done this. In fact, I think it's. I think if a union chooses to expand into other areas, that's great. The ultimate question is it going to do it? Is it going to do it professionally and responsibly? And I think in this particular case, when it's about birthday parties, the answer to that is probably no. Could do better.
What makes Solidarity different is that it's not in bed with a governing party. That's a quite straightforward distinction there. The union movement is part of the tripartite alliance, and therefore it is ulterior motives. Solidarity is a union that is not aligned with the governing party, so quite clearly it has its members' interests at heart, as far as I could tell. So this isn't a slight on unions. This is a sort of an indication that the greatest thing you could, the three most dangerous forces coupling up or shacking up together in a democracy is big business, big labor, and big government.
Or do you have final thoughts, Terence?
No, look, just to point out that NUMSA actually left the tripartite alliance, and so it's weird that the investment vehicle is giving the ANC money. Though I do think that there's maybe something to be explored here. If this is from 360 Health, to what extent does the investment vehicle exercise authority over that? You could find that there's some sort of tangled webs that are being weaved here. Just a thought.
Indeed. All right, let's move on to our next story, and this is about. I think we should talk a little bit about just the enormous number of refugees that are being produced by the conflict in Eastern Europe. So there were some estimates that at least 5 million people would end up as refugees due to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. In this particular case, it looks like those estimates are well on their way to being matched. It has only been a week since the invasion started, and according to the United Nations, I believe 1 million people have already crossed the border into neighboring countries. At least half of them, it seems, have gone to Poland, which is quite a tidal wave of humanity. There's also, apparently, there's not that much in the way of sort of large refugee camps in Poland, and that actually a lot of the refugees are being housed in individual people's houses, volunteers, which is quite remarkable. But one shudders to think what the sort of political and economic consequences of this are going to be. I mean, we saw that about 1 million migrants entering into Germany this week, over the past couple of years, was a big shakeup for European politics and boosted a lot of parties in the anti-immigration sphere. Now it looks like we have at least 1 million more from Ukraine, and maybe many, many times more than that, maybe 5 million more by the end of the conflict, maybe even more than that. Hermann, what do you make of this?
Yeah, perhaps just one quick aside for poor old Whiskey Jack in the comments who just likes IRR talking points. He certainly enjoys listening to them very loyally, so it is appreciated, sir. But one of the interesting points of Europe being at this, in this humanitarian crisis, is I spoke to a Swedish academic a couple of years ago, and this was during the early days of the migration crisis of the Syrian civil war, where many of these governments were overwhelmed by this influx of people from overseas, because the government simply did not have, it wasn't within the framework or the frame of reference of these governments to deal with homelessness of this scale, with malnutrition of this scale, the criminal elements that might come with this sort of desperation. These states are relatively homogeneic European middle-class nations, and part of that is that they don't have to face these issues. So when these issues suddenly came upon them in the numbers of immigrants, the states were completely caught unprepared. And that is something that I think might have changed in the last few years, but probably not at the speed that would be needed for the influx of, between 1 million and 5 million people. It's very, very possible that these Ukrainians have skills that they can bring to these countries. But if anyone's ever spoken to someone fleeing a military area, the last thing they want to do is settle in a different country, and the first thing they want to do is get back to their home. So the possible economic benefits from immigration really comes only when these people are longer term human capital investments in societies. So I think Europe has a tough gig ahead of it, but the Syrian crisis might have prepared it to a certain extent. A real question now, however, is how Germany will react, because Angela Merkel received a lot of flack and a lot of praise in almost equal measures for her decision to allow 1 million Syrians also into the country. And now the question of 1 million or so Ukrainians will be an interesting point to observe, and one might even see Europe's latent inability to actually deal with people of a significantly different race. People think that South Africa has racial tensions. Well, then you haven't seen Australia and Europe in the midst of racial tensions. And if these people are more welcoming of Ukrainians, it might be down to the fact that they share culture and religion and so on. But the German reaction to this will probably test the relatively new German coalition government. You are muted, sir.
You're muted.
I'm doing this so often recently. I think it's worth saying on that point that I'm not really sure how much they do share religion. After all, a lot of Ukrainians are either Catholic or Russian Orthodox, or Ukrainian Orthodox, more specifically. While the people of Europe tend to not go in for that religion stuff too much. Anyway, Terence, your thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure just how religious the Ukrainians are. Generations of communism apparently had some sort of impact there. But be that as it may, I think that maybe what is the defining difference here, aside from any kind of underlying assumptions about culture or even race, is that this is a conflict that has generated a great deal of sympathy and support amongst the host nations. And I don't think that this was the case with the Syrian conflict. Now, that may not be admirable, but I think that is an explanation. And I think that also buried within that is the assumption that once the Russian bear is chased back across the border, the Ukrainians will go too. So they are being welcomed on a strictly provisional basis. I suspect if this does turn into some sort of long-term thing, and there is conflict over public housing, for instance, or you have Ukrainian criminal syndicates. I understand there's no shortage of those moving in. The welcome might start to wear thin very quickly. That being said, I think this is also still very early days. I mean, this conflict has only been going for a week. If it settles into some sort of mass displacement over many years, the way Yugoslavia did, I think that could also see. There are a lot of assumptions, all of this, and very early. However, it is one of our tasks as analysts to try and look ahead. I spent some time in Europe around the time of the outbreak of the Yugoslav crisis, and Sweden at that stage was praised very much as Germany was for having taken a lot of refugees. Germany was there was a lot of debate around it. Britain was kind of adopting a hands-off position, but I do remember a point of major public discussion was which refugees are you taking, because there were these distinct groups. Western Europe sympathies are very much more strongly oriented towards the Croats, but when Croatia sort of stabilized its sphere of influence, it was the Bosnians. Now, I think because the political sympathies weren't there, or weren't there to the same extent as they were with the Slovenes and the Croats, and there was the religious angle, there was some resistance to this. But I understand that a generation later, Sweden has a fairly large community of people descended from that Bosnian migration. They're fairly well integrated. In fact, I saw a YouTube video some time ago about the refugee issue in Sweden, and they interviewed a woman who was, I think she came to Sweden as a child as a Bosnian refugee, and she was saying, "No, well, this is ridiculous. We can't take all of these people."
Yeah, no, how things change. Anyway, we are out of time. I just want to say I read a story today about a Syrian refugee who was resettled in Ukraine. And if you ever were looking for proof that life is cruel, I suspect that that's probably the best you're ever going to find. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next week on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.